Hi, everyone. Happy Wednesday. We are going to wait just a few minutes and let those of you join us. There we go.
If you're joining, tell us hi and where you're watching from.
Hey, Leslie.
From Missouri. How many states can we hit? Hi, Heather from California.
Diane, North Carolina.
Hello.
Catherine,
Illinois.
Anne, South Dakota.
South Dakota.
Olivia.
Maryland.
Michigan. Texas. Hey, Danielle. Good crowd.
All right. We are going to go ahead and get started, everyone. We have a special guest with us today. Dr. Wayne Ayers is with us, and he is an Elanco technical consultant veterinarian. And we're going to be discussing the most important reasons for fly control in your herd.
If you have any questions, be sure to put those in the comments. At the end of the segment, one lucky viewer is going to win a $150 shopping spree of Elanco products. So be sure to get your questions in there or just tell us hello and let us know where you're watching from. And with that, Dr. Ayers, we're going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and we'll kind of run through some of the ins and outs of fly control, and hopefully be able to help some folks that are on the broadcast today. So it is my pleasure to be here. When we think about flies, there's a lot of different reasons, several different reasons that we should be worrying about fly control. One is just from the animal's standpoint. These things are incredibly annoying. They bite, and most of the flies bite, and it's painful. So there's an animal welfare issue to fly control, as well as some of the economic things that we usually think of first. So there's 4 flies that we're basically most concerned about, and those are horn flies and stable flies, face flies, and house flies. Now, cattle are mostly on the horn flies and the face flies. They're the flies that bother them the most. But stable flies do attack cattle, especially those that are near our farm sites, our buildings, or if we have a confined operation. So maybe a dairy or a hoop barn beef operation, which we're starting to see more of those. So those stable flies can attack any of those. Face flies are mostly, like I said, they're usually the ones on the face of the cattle. And then house flies are annoying to everybody. Again, those are generally around the premise or around garbage sites, or those kind of things. So we can divide these kind of into 2 groups. Before I get there, the stable fly also is pretty annoying to horses. That's the one that you do see horses stomping their legs, kind of dancing around. Those things are very, very painful. when they bite. So we kind of divide these flies up into two segments. They're on animal, which is the horn fly and the phase fly, and then the environmental, which are stable flies and house flies. House flies we throw into that category of filth flies because that's where they reproduce. So kind of we'll talk a little bit about the economics, and then I'll get into some specifics on each one of these flies and maybe how we go about controlling them. So the second aspect, like I mentioned, is the animal welfare issue of flies, and then also the economics. So horn flies in cattle have been demonstrated to cost about 15 pounds of weaning weight, up to 15 pounds of weaning weight on a calf. So if you think in today's market, we're going to be having roughly $3 a pound calves this fall. In fact, yesterday's online sale, there was a lot of cattle sold at $3 a pound. So that represents $45. Well, if I can spend a few dollars and make 45, that seems like a logical thing to do, right? From the stalker side of things, horn flies have been shown to cost 50 pounds, up to 50 pounds worth of weight gain from a stalker calf. So there again, you put that times 250 or 275, whatever we think those heavier weight stalkers are going to weigh. There's a lot of economic incentive to try and control some of these flies. Stable flies, they've been estimated to decrease milk by around 40%. So if you have a dairy, or whether it's a large dairy or small dairy, or just the worry factor from these stable flies biting their legs, and if they're biting their legs and cattle are grouped up in a bunch, they're not eating. So if they're not eating, they're not producing milk. And the way, in both from the dairy side for milk, but also for our cow calf, if that cow's not producing as much milk as she should, then that calf is not gaining to its genetic potential. Phase flies, they're the ones that accumulate around the eyes and around the muzzle. They feed on tears. They feed on nasal secretions. They're very annoying to have a fly buzzing around up your nose all the time in the corner of your eye. But they also, they represent about a $10 to $12 loss or potential loss because they transmit pink eye. And so we know that cattle that have a pink eye scar tend to bring less at the time of sale. And so there's an economic loss plus the animal welfare loss. The biggest thing with house flies, besides being annoying to both animals and to people, just the workers that have to be around them, they transmit disease. They've been demonstrated to carry, I believe, up to 80 different organisms on their feet. And those include E. coli, salmonella, and those are the ones that we think about. We know that flies can move that around, like on hutch calves. They get into the water, they get into the milk buckets. So that they're very important economically to control those, and just the nuisance of them. So the one thing we have to think about is what's the best way to control these, and each one of them have their own little nuances based off of where they live, where they rest, where they breed, and their life cycle. And so that's one of the things that we have at Elanco is Elanco has the largest parasiticide insecticide portfolio in the world with the acquisition of Bayer. So all those products that you've come to know or rely on from Bayer are now Elanco, and they will you'll start to see them in the retail space with the Elanco label on. But we have lots of different avenues. So one of the things to think about, we'll just kind of, the more places that we touch flies. So if I can treat the animal, if I can treat the environment where the flies rest, and if I can treat where they breed, the better fly control I will have. one of the things that happens is a lot of times we do a decent job on the on animal, like we spray them or we put on ear tags, but we don't do some of these other control points, and it seems like we never get anywhere. We're constantly having to spray once a week or every couple of weeks. The flies keep coming. Well, that's because we're not addressing the breeding areas. So we'll kind of run down each one of these are a little bit, have a little bit of a nuance, and I'll just kind of maybe discuss some of those on a fly by fly, I guess, basis. We'll start with horn flies. So some different strategies for the horn flies is one, we can put fly tags in. The best way to go about that is if I can afford 3 tags, that's ideal. One in each of the ear of the cow, and then one in one of the ears of the calf. If that's kind of out of my budget, then I would definitely do 2 in the cow. And the reason we do the cow and not the calf is because the economic loss from the calf is because of the decreased milk production of the cow. So these horn flies, they live on the cow their entire life. The only time that they come off is they fly over to a fresh fecal pat, lay their eggs, and then they fly back to a cow. So there's no intermediate. So if I treat the cow, I'm killing the adults. And then if I treat the breeding area, which is the fecal pat, it has to be a fresh one, then I'm going to control both the larva, the new hat, and some of the and the adults. So why do we treat the cow? Well, these things bite 20 to 30 times a day, these horn flies, and they take a blood meal every time. So we have been able to measure that it only takes about 200 flies, horn flies, on a cow, and we can start to measure economic loss. If everybody just take their hand and hold it like that, that space will hold 200 flies of the horn flies. So if I look at a cow and I put my hand out there and I go, yeah, it's pretty full and there's still flies around them, I'm losing money. That's kind of the economic threshold, and it's a really easy method to kind of look at and say, hey, I need to treat some. Ideally, we want to treat before we get all the fly problem, because trying to catch up is real hard because we already have those out in the environment now, and they're going to keep coming until we kill all those adults. So we put the tags on the cow. The cow, when she grooms herself, she spreads the chemical from the fly tag around on her body. And when she grooms her calf, she also spreads the chemical onto that calf. So now if she has less flies biting her, less of them consuming her blood, she's going to be a less chance of being anemic. These things can actually cause cows to become anemic. When they have several thousand of them on, we've all seen those cows, they swish their tail and this black cloud comes up and goes back down. That's several thousand flies. It's been an estimate that these cows can lose up to a pint of blood a day if the flies go untreated and they're in that, several thousand range. It's an incredible amount. These little things are only drinking a drop at a time, but if I take several thousand droplets and I do that 30 times a day, that's a lot of blood. So that's part of the reason. I mean, that is the reason that the cows have decreased milk production. They can get anemic. While the flies are bothering them, they're not grazing. They're looking for relief from the flies. And so that cow is spreading that chemical around. Sometimes people think, oh, it's just this big cloud, like the bubble boy. It's kind of a cloud around and keeps the flies off. It isn't. It's truly a chemical thing. And the only reason to put the tag in the calf is then on the heat of the day, those flies will come down and land on the belly of the cow because they don't like the sun either. So they'll lay on the belly of the cow and then they'll bite down there. So when we put the tag in the calf, when that calf is suckling, it's spreading the chemical on the belly of the cow and helping relieve those flies from the belly of that cow, make her more comfortable. But the cow will take care of that calf, by spreading the chemical around. So I mentioned that these horn flies reproduce in the feces of the cow, and it has to be a fresh one. They actually know when a cow defecates, they fly off, lay their eggs, and they fly right back. So then we can use some things, larvicides that we feed through. Rabon is an example. Clarify is another one that you've probably heard of. Altacid's another one. They act differently. They're in different chemical classes, but the principle is the same. As that egg hatches in the feces, that chemical is there because the cow ate it and it passed through and is now in the feces, and it keeps those eggs from hatching or kills the larva as they do hatch. And so now we prevent more adults from coming, and therefore we reduce the number of the adults that are on the cows, causing them trouble. The other thing that we need to think about is maybe some added on animal control. So the fly tags, they have a limited life, and you have to look at the labels. All of them are slightly different. Ours are all labeled for about 150 days, that there's a chemical being released. The ideal or the maximum control point is somewhere between 90 days and 120 days. But they're still effective. They're effective out to the 150, but the best control is out to that 90 to 120. And the reason it's variable is because every time it rains, the cow has to spread the chemical all over herself because it does wash off or it gets diluted. So she has to spread it around again by just normal grooming. So when we get out to this point, maybe we put those fly tags in, somewhere in April, 1st of May, just ahead of when the flies, we know we're going to start to see them. You get out here to the August, maybe their effectiveness is starting to go away. So some people that have a really long fly season, California, Florida, many parts of the Southeast, the fly season is incredibly long. It's 9-10 months out of the year. They only get relief for a month or two. You either reapply another fly tag to try and get some more control, or we can do some things ahead of when we normally see the populations start to bloom, as we call it. They're starting to build up. We'll put out back rubs, maybe dust bags, oilers. Some of the things that we used to rely on back when I started in practice years ago, before we had really good tags, that's what we relied on was, back rubbers and oilers and dust bags. And cows learn, they know what they are. And once they get to rubbing on them and they know they get some relief, they'll seek them out. You put them over by the water tank, you put them by the mineral, make sure that they aren't set to where the powder or the drip is going to get in the water, the feed, of course, but they naturally go to those places and then they'll seek out those that other application. So now the cow is applying a chemical to herself. One thing to keep in mind is flies are incredibly adaptive, and we hear about flies becoming resistant to some of our chemicals. And that happens. So we do need to rotate, especially with horn flies, we need to rotate chemical classes. That doesn't mean brands, that means the chemical. So you have to look at it, and is the chemical an organophosphate, for instance, like Kumafos? Or is it a pyrethroid, like one of the pyrethroids, say in Silence Ultra, that's a pyrethroid tag that we have. So we want to rotate between those two. It only takes about a year or two to start to see resistance to a pyrethrin or pyrethroid, and it takes 2 or 3 years to start to see resistance to an organophosphate. So we rotate between classes. Where was I going? Oh, I see there's a question there. I'll answer that real quick. Mm-hmm. So tags are not labeled for horses. Tags do not build an air, like an aura around an animal. They have to be contact. So I know people have put them into manes or put them into tails with the idea that the tail's going to apply the thing around their body. But tags in general are not labeled for horses. There's much better products out there for sprays and wipes to put to get chemical onto a horse. I always worry about them losing them too, and then something actually, maybe around the dogs or the cats or the kids around the horses coming in contact with the chemical more than, the tags more than they need to. So personally, I don't recommend putting them on horses. There's other things that we can do that are probably going to be more effective. Hope that answered your questions. So now, that's kind of the idea on the horn flies. They cause us the most economic loss as far as flies go. Face flies they're annoying. It only takes 12 to 14 on an animal's face, and it's we know that they're potentially causing some economic loss when there's just a few of them on an animal. Like I said, they feed on the tears, they feed on the nasal secretions, so they're kind of always annoying, trying to go up their nose and get a little drop that's coming out of their nose. They go up into the corner of their eye, and they try and feed on the tears, and if there's not enough tears there, they take their foot and stick it in the corner of your eye. The worst part about them is they move the organism, the bacteria called Moraxella bovis. They move that from cow to cow, and that's the organism that causes pink eye. So these face flies tend to spread pink eye around. Tags are very effective for face flies. If we're doing a lot of times you'll see if you put a bag out, a dust bag, you'll see bulls especially. Sometimes cows, they'll get underneath there with their head, they bump it. They figure out that powder is helping get rid of those flies, and so they bump it on their face in order to get a little bit of powder on their face, keep those face flies off. When we do sprays are very effective. You got to look at the labels. Some labels that have a fly label, different products will say not to put it on the face, and that maybe there's a vehicle, maybe there's something that can cause some eye irritation. So there's a reason. Always follow the label on any of these products. But a lot of times we'll put a little droplet on the poll of an animal. That helps. Like if we're going to spray them or pour them, that'll help keep the flies off their face, and then put the rest down their back. So that's the face flies. They're very important just from the pink eye part of it. Stable flies. Let me see. There's another question there. I can see that. Blocks with Raybon. So Raybon, I do not believe is labeled for horses, right? I will double check so I don't steer you wrong. I have my Bible right here. Let me look at the label. Always consult the label. If it doesn't have it on it, it's not for it. The wettable powder is, but I don't know about the feed through. Yes, it is. I'm sorry. I stand corrected. Raybon is labeled for horses. So both the spray on and the feed through are labeled for horses. So if you can get them, and the horses will consume the block or consume the mineral, whatever your supplement is, follow the directions, follow whatever mill is putting it together, because it depends on their formulation and how much the animal is supposed to eat. So anything that we can do to do double duty, getting rid of some of the flies replicating in the feces, killing those larvae, and doing like a wipe on pyrethrin or even a spray with the Coumaphos is a good thing. Okay, stable flies. If you've ever been to a lot of times you go to a dairy or you look out at a pasture and you see all the cattle are bunched together. Especially if that pasture is near the buildings or near where they fed. A lot of times, those the reason that they're bunched up is they're being attacked by stable flies. Stable flies don't spend very much time on an animal's leg. They live on the legs. They bite the legs of the animal. They don't spend a lot of time there. They go there, they land, they eat, they take a blood meal. Their bites are incredibly painful. If you've ever been bitten by one, and really woke you up. It's comparable to a wasp sting. It's how it doesn't linger as long, but that initial pain to me is about the same. You won't forget it if you've ever been bitten by one. And it only takes about 4 to 6 flies on each leg to start causing economic loss. So you'll remember I said that horn flies live on the back of the cattle, and sometimes they'll be down on the belly in the heat of the day. Well, sometimes you'll see them during the heat of the day down on the legs as well. So an interesting thing to be able to tell whether you have horn flies, stable flies, or both is to go out and look at them. A horn fly always feeds with its head down. So regardless of if it's on the back or on the legs, their head will be pointed towards the ground. The stable fly only feeds on the legs, and their head is always pointed up. So you can just go out and look. You don't have to be an entomologist. You don't have to be a specialist. You can just go out and look between those two and say, hey, I have horn flies, I have stable flies, or I have both. Stable flies reproduce in decaying organic material. So that's why they're usually around the stable. That's why they're called stable flies, where the manure piles may be built up. Maybe there's decomposing feed next, or a mud hole next to the water tank. And there's debris, there's leaves, there's whatever decaying around the edge of that mud hole. And so it's really important. Environment is really important for the control of stable flies. One of the things that people forget about is we have round bale feeders next to our place, and we have a round bale feeder, and now the cows are out to pasture, but I don't clean it up until I need to bring the cows back and put a new bale in there. Well, stable flies and house flies are replicating in that decomposing feed in and around that feeder, where the manure is, where the feed is. It's a perfect environment for them to reproduce. And if you go over and roll some of that stove over, you'll start to see maggots in there. You'll see pupa in there, and that's where all these things are replicating. So we want to clean things up. Environmental cleanliness is really important for stable flies and for house flies. These do bite. They take a blood meal, but then they go off and rest. So if you've ever walked into the stable where the horses are, or at a dairy and the feed bunk, or even at a feedlot, small feedlot, or your corrals, and over on the shade side, there's flies lined up, and they're kind of got their head pointing up like an airplane getting ready to take off. Those are stable flies, and they're resting. They took their blood meal. They're sitting over in the shade, and they're resting, digesting their blood meal, having a good day, thanking you for not cleaning up the poop. So it's very important. It's easy to kind of look at some of these things, and we don't often pay attention to some of these little things that clue me in on what kind of pest I have out there. So it's really important. Like on horses, we want to wipe their legs. So some products that we can use on the horses: Permectin CDS, Permectin 2, whether we spray them. But cattle as well. If we go out to spray cattle, and we know we have some stable flies, we've seen them, we need to make sure we spray legs. Otherwise, we'll deal with the face flies and the horn flies, but the stable flies are still gonna attack them. The other problem that happens, and for those of you that live in areas where we have a lot of heat and a lot of humidity, those stable flies, or even sometimes just the flies in general, dropping animals or causing animals to bunch up. They bunch up because they don't want to be it. They don't want to be on the outside. They want to be in the inside where the other cattle are maybe helping them keep those flies away. And those animals in the center are very susceptible to heat stress on a hot, humid day, because now they're on the inside and they're not getting the benefit of the air movement, a little bit of a breeze that helps keep them cow cool on a hot day, especially black cattle on a hot day. So there's another, that's just one more of those animal welfare things to try and we need to control some of these flies is allow cattle to spread out. Cattle that are all spread out and walking around eating, spending most of their time eating, generally have a lower fly count than those that are bunched up together. There are some larvicides out there that we can similar but they're different classes, but the principle is the same as the feed through for the cows and the horses. And that is these areas like around my lagoon, or I have a composting area where I'm composting old hay or manure. If it's moisture, if there's moist areas around there that those flies may be replicating, we can sprinkle or spray a larvicide that'll have residual there, and as those eggs hatch, it will kill the developing larvae. So we can control some of the larva development for both stable flies and house flies in those areas. The other thing that's really important on stable flies is mowing the grass. These things love to hang out. One of the other resting places, they'll go over in tall grass and they'll fly down in next to the ground where it's a little bit cooler, where they're kind of protected from the sunlight, and they'll kind of hide out in the tall grass. So, at least a couple 100 feet away from your facilities, if you can mow the grass down, that'll certainly help. Probably don't have to go, flies that have kind of a distance that they'll fly on their own. So, but generally we kind of consider a couple 100 feet we mow the grass. So yeah, the feed throughs, the diflubenzuron, what we call an IGR, those do not have any effect on dung beetles. So they are dung beetle friendly. So that would be a good one to make sure that if I'm going to do a feed through where I'm trying to protect and use products that are dung beetle and earthworm friendly, that I go with IGR, diflubenzuron. Pest rubs, help horses. So a rub, I assume you mean by like an oiler or those sock tubes that we put the chemical on. The animal has to actually come in contact with it. There is a little bit of repellency, let's say, to pyrethroids that kind of keep flies away, but they actually have to have it on them in order to be effective. So generally with horses, the best thing is either a spray or a wipe on. And I know some horses don't like the spray very well. You kind of have to work with your horse, and some of them never get over that. But I find it's kind of a slow, easy, process over the course of, several days or a few weeks on a horse as a means of training them. Some horses don't really care. But the wipe on is usually never a big deal. And so we just, there are some applicators, there's some insecticide mitts. I believe I've seen those on your site in the past, haven't I? The mitts where we can apply the chemical and use it to wipe they look like a car wash mitt, but they have a glove on the inside so we don't come in contact with them. So, check out the Valley Vet site, and I think you can find those. You can put the chemical on and then wipe the horse and the foals down with that. Make sure you wipe them everywhere. I'm going to get to house flies now. Kind of, they're the same kind of a way, same deal. They're a filth fly. They replicate in wherever there's decomposing debris, manure, rotting hay, anything like that. Compost that's hadn't gotten up to temperature, around the edge of lagoons, those kind of things. So trying to just think about where all these things replicate and make them as dry as possible and as exposed to sunshine as possible. Some really good fly products that we have. One of them is called Agita, and it actually has an attractant. We have a couple different ones. One's Agita and one's called Quick Bait. And they come as a spray, and then Quick Bait comes as a granule as well. But we can spray a spot spray an area and it has a pheromone in it that will attract the houseflies to that area. Then the chemical that we use for control, the insecticide, is linked to a sugar molecule. So the fly gets attracted because of the smell, and then they get there and they go, oh, hey, here's something to eat, and they eat it, and then they die within seconds and they fall on the ground. So that is one for around the premise. It's a very good one that to use on a variety of specifically for houseflies. So I'll spray them on the north side of my chicken coop or my barn, kind of where maybe the flies are going to go in the heat of the day. I spray my garbage cans on the underside where flies can get in and out of there, so that they go and then they die and fall into the can. Um, Again, those are with the attractant. I might spray around the windowsill. The one watch out for this chemical is, and many others, is read the label. We don't want to spray where the animal can chew or lick at the fence or anything like that. So you want to make sure it's away from where the animals are above them. Rafters, like say up on the rafter where you see the fly specks around windowsills, that kind of thing, where it's outside of where the animals can get to. Calf hutches, we'll spray the shade side of calf hutches, not in the hutch. There's other products that we have to use in the hutch, like we can use Elector, or we can on the inside of the hutch. We can use some of the other premise sprays on the inside of the hutch where an animal can be there, but the Agita needs to be on the outside. But it's a great fly control for some of these house flies. Do we want to any questions so far? I'll take a breath and everybody can maybe ask another question, and we'll see where we want to go with some more of this discussion.
Okay. Aileen had a question there. Is it best to let manure in the trash bins dry out, or just keep the top on the bin instead so that flies can't get into it? She's in Scottsdale, Arizona.
Yeah, so if it really depends on what you're trying to do. If it's just going away and going to the landfill, then probably just making sure that we have some kind of treatment and they go and you get rid of it in a timely fashion. I would just put some spray around the bin, maybe on the inside. Ideally, if you can spread manure out and let it dry out, then the eggs can't hatch in it. But it just depends. If I'm going to compost it, then I want it wet, obviously, because it has to be damp in order to compost. So it really depends. If I'm putting it in and it's going to be hauled off to the landfill, then just seal it up so that maybe the flies can't get out, like in a garbage sack, and then put it in the bin, and then maybe treat my bin. I hope that answered the question. Quick bait tends to dull slightly in our humid environment. Okay, so that is that can be an issue with the granules, is the moisture and the humidity or rain getting on them, and that's kind of the benefit of the spray on. One of the differences between quick bait spray and the Agita spray is sometimes with the quick bait spray, you may see a little bit of a tan residue. It'll rinse off and wash off. So if you do put it on around the house or something, or on a barn where you're going to see, I might use that one where I'm not going to have, while I look at it all the time. It does rinse away, but the Agita does not leave a residue. So that's the other nice thing about it. You don't see it, so I can put little spots maybe around the house up high where the kids or the dogs can't get to it. I can put it over on the, by the barn and kill those flies over there. It lasts in the shade without rain or water on it. You can get 4 to 6 weeks out of it. We probably wouldn't need to reapply it, depending on how much sunshine, how much moisture you get. You probably shouldn't have to reapply it for 2 to 3 weeks at least. Even if it's even if you do have a high moisture area. I'm falling behind here. What do we got going on?
Diane asked, she said, long hair cattle versus slick cattle products. She has a Highland beef operation. Any suggestions that are better than others?
Well, I would still say no, because I mean, it probably doesn't matter that much the length of the hair. It's not like that the chemical needs to get to the skin, like if you're trying to control lice. If you're trying to control lice, the chemical has to be on the skin. With fly control, it can be on the hair itself. So a tag should work equally well on long-haired cattle as they do on short-haired cattle, and so will sprays or pour-ons, because it will on the pour-on, like our Permectin CDS, we want to use the shower head so it kind of sprays and then actually gets on the surface of the hair where the flies will come in contact with it. So it shouldn't matter. It's all about having it there on the tips of the hair and on the hair coat itself where the flies can actually access it.
Jolie had asked if this segment would be, she'd be able to rewatch this segment. And Jolie, this will live on our Facebook page as well as our YouTube channel. So you can go back and watch it anytime.
And then you can call me a liar as many times as you need. I hope I'm giving you the straight information here. No, I'm doing. That's what I want to do. This is good that we have been able to reference it for people to try. And there's a lot to take in. We cover a lot of area, a lot of different things. So it's great that you guys are leaving it up for people to look at. There was one.
Dana had one. She said, is there a feed through for horses that is safe for composting? I plan to use my compost manure in my garden and pasture.
You know what? I do not have any firsthand knowledge on composting, whether there's an issue with composting with some of these different products that are out there. It would be one I'd have to look up. I just can't think off the top of my head. I mean, the whole idea, we know that there's a lot of manure from barns or dairies and feedlots that does get composted and then gets put out on fields with no negative effects. But if you wanted a specific citation and a specific product, I would have to look that up, because I don't recall anything like that on anybody's label, actually. Let's see what else we got over here. What do you recommend when neighbors water their grass? Yeah, that's a tough one. What do you do about the neighbors if they don't mow their lawn or they don't take care of things? There ain't much you can do. All you can do is treat your area. So things like some of the premise sprays that we have that we can put on the inside of the barns, Permectin 2, Permectin CDS, Agita, those kind of things that you can have out, so when the house flies come over, then they get attracted to that spot and you kill them. If they go into your barns, go into your facility using the premise sprays, then they'll access those chemicals where they roost. The most important thing is to look for, when I'm using a premise spray for fly control, is where are the flies going? And so if they're roosting if you look for the fly specks, that's where they're resting. So I spray where the fly specks are, as long as, nobody's going to chew on it. So fly specks around the doorway, you see around windowsills, fly specks around the windowsills. You go into the barn, you look, there's fly specks on the rafters. There's fly specks on poles a lot of times, on the vertical poles in the barn or around the cattle facilities, like where you're processing cattle. You'll see the fly specks up high in the post, and I'll just spray those with any of those products, and that'll help control it.
We had another question. Which fly variety causes the summer sores in horses around their mouth, and which products help?
Yeah. So a lot of these sores are and some of the irritations that we see. Sometimes you'll see those white plaques on the inside of ears or of horses' ears, or you'll see some of the irritations on their chest or their face. A lot of times those are gnats. Those are actually cuticoides gnats and not necessarily the flies that are doing it. These pyrethroid sprays, like the permethrin CDS, where you can wipe and get it maybe where the animal isn't going to be licking it all the time, can get away from it. Like the ears, we use that pretty commonly. Just put it on a towel or use one of those wipes and wipe the inside of their ears to keep the cuticoides off. And that'll make a big difference, using a wipe on for horses.
Leslie asked where the tags can be purchased at, and they can be purchased through Valley Vet Supply or valleyvet.com.
Yep.
We also have a few products to show you. We've been talking about here. The quick bait, spot spray.
Comes in a couple different sizes. Comes in one that's already ready with a spray bottle and has the powder in the bottom. You just add water and spray. The Agita. Oh, there's the Elector. Go ahead.
Yeah, the premise spray.
Yeah, that is a fantastic product right there. I use that one a lot on my place as a premise spray. It also has an on-animal label for poultry for northern fowl mites. And so it's a good one if you've got fowl mites in your poultry. You can go out. I go out at night myself if I see them or build up. I mix up a little bit of that into a hand sprayer that has a wand on it, like a garden sprayer.
Mm-hmm.
And I go out at night while they're on the roost, so I don't have to catch every bird and like you do with the powder and powder them. And I wear a red headlamp. So one thing about wearing red is at night we can see, but it doesn't upset the birds. When you go in with a white headlamp, especially with guinea birds, you really upset them. A white light will really upset peacocks as well, peafowl. They just fly, they'll flap around. So I use a red one, and I can walk out there into my flock while they're on the roost and just spray everybody's behind, and it works very well, and nobody gets upset by using that red light. And then when I clean the coop, I use it as a premise spray at that point in time and spray the roost and spray the floor around where maybe the concrete meets the dirt or where the concrete meets the wall meets the concrete. And I'll spray everything and then put my bedding down. And that way, if there's anything that crawls around, including darkling beetles, which can get underneath, live underneath around the water tanks and that sort of thing, then as they crawl through that residue, it'll control them as well. And on the mites, those northern fowl mites, they'll live off and on the bird, and so they'll crawl down into the little cracks and crevices along where the birds roost, and then climb up on them at night and reinfest them. So I like to spray the roost with that. And that's one of the beautiful things about that particular product is I can spray it on the walls. I can spray it, to control the flies when they get on the wall, but I can also use it on the bird. That's the Elector or PSP. Yep. And then the other one that we did mention was the Agita. So that's what that looks like. That's enough there to mix up 2 gallons of spray. So this was originally created and marketed through the commercial poultry side, but we've found that it does such a wonderful job that we've been using it out on the beef side. We've been using it in the feedlots. We've been just really using it in a lot of different places. So it makes 2 gallons of spray. But there are directions on the side to make smaller batches, and I make it in the small batch. I like to use it myself in that's another one that I have at my house all the time. I like to use the little top pump sprayers that have the little plunger on the top, like the 2-liter ones, just the small ones. And then I use the smallest directions that are on there, mix that up. You kind of want to use it up within a week. So that's the whole point of not making too much is once it's mixed, it can start to lose some effectiveness. I like to use it up within a week. And so I kind of wait, I go figure out where I'm going to spray it, and I use most of it up in the next couple of days. But if you have a large area to spray, then certainly, all those directions are on there how to mix it and get a larger amount. Did that answer? I think.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Melissa said, is there anything for gnats that would help with gnats? She lives just below the gnat line in South Georgia.
Gnats are those gnats, cuticoides specifically, are a miserable creature. That's for sure. They're a pest, and then they're irritating. They transmit disease. Certainly we can, there should be some effectiveness. I'm just looking at the permethrin CDS. The pyrethroids in general are fairly effective against those. Some of the products are specifically labeled. CDS is not specifically labeled for gnats, but it is for mosquitoes. But I would look for the like the permethrin CDS, the permethrin 2, that and look for a specific label. But those would be my two go-tos, just because everything seems to have some sensitivity to the gnat. I do see fly specks everywhere. Purchase fly. So yeah, if you're using those the wasps, the predators, you do have to be really careful about sprays because they're sensitive to sprays as well. So in general, I would say we use one or the other. There may be places I wouldn't just go out and spray the grass and that sort of thing if I'm using the predators. You could be cautious about using them inside, stables or inside the buildings, probably because you're not going to have too many of the wasps in there. But I would avoid them out, where the wasps are trying to look for those larval eggs.
Jean had asked if fly preventatives given through feed-throughs is safe.
Yeah, it is safe. I mean, we've been using them a long time. Raybon's been around for a long time. They're generally considered safe. If the diflubenzuron is certainly safe. Raybon is organophosphate, so but as far as handling and that sort of thing, yes, we don't need to worry about the amount that comes through is very small. The diflubenzuron, the IGR that we talk about, that is certainly more, let's say, dung beetle friendly, maybe. So if we're in a concern where we're trying to build that population back up, then probably that might be a better choice to use the diflubenzuron.
Okay. All right. I think that's all the questions.
Well, cool. I certainly appreciate the opportunity. If there's questions about products or you want to see, the entire list, I mean, we barely touched on a few of them. Valley Vet, I know, carries almost all the products that we have. There are a couple, like some of the feed-throughs are basically available through your feed mill. They have to come in a carrier, so you want to talk to your local feed mill about using those products. More information, reach out to Valley Vet. The websites have access to all of the labels. There's a click for more information. You can make sure you click on those and go through and read the labels. Also, excuse me. Also, double check with your Elanco rep and for your area. Reach out. There's to our website. Do a contact us, and they will get you in touch with either your Elanco sales representative or, like myself, a technical consultant that can maybe answer a specific question that you might have. Okay. I saw there was something about allergies, and I have. That's probably an MD question, not an old vet question.
All right, Dr. Ayers, we want to thank you so much for joining us today. We had so many good questions. This was just a great segment.
If you guys have any more questions, go ahead and put them in the comments. And if we can't answer them, we'll get with Dr. Ayers and get an answer for you.
Yeah,
All
we'll
right.
Make sure you get them. I do appreciate it. I do appreciate the invite. It was a pleasure, and I'm thankful for the people that came on today to learn a little bit about flies. So it's a big topic.
Yeah.
Yes, we had a good group today. And one lucky viewer is going to win a $150 shopping spree of Elanco products. So, Melanie, who is our winner
The
today?
winner today is Leslie Rockwell.
Woohoo! Congratulations, Leslie.
If you're still on here, Leslie, go ahead and send us a private message and claim your prize.
All right. We have a couple more quick announcements. Before we let you go,
There are quite a few horse people on here. So we have a giveaway going on. It's a Vibe giveaways going on. You get some Ice Vibe wear. So if you haven't entered, get entered. The deadline is August 11th. So
and make sure you keep an eye out on our events page on Facebook to see all the upcoming live events that we have going on. And that's all for today. Thank you all for joining.
bye.
Thank
everyone.
you.